3 days later, Karen sat in her home office surrounded by legal documents, county ordinances, and a detailed map of every property line in Meadowbrook Heights. The humiliation of the garden hose incident had crystallized her resolve. If the Hendersons wanted to play hardball, she'd show them what real power looked like. Her first strike came at 7 a.m. sharp with a certified letter hand-delivered by the mail carrier. Tom opened it to find a formal citation for 11 separate HOA violations, each carrying a $50 daily fine until corrected. The gazebo, the mailbox color, grass height exceeding the 2.5-inch maximum, and unauthorized bird feeder. The list went on. $550 a day, Tom read aloud to Martha over breakfast, until we comply with all cited violations. Martha set down her coffee with deliberate calm. She's lost her mind. But Karen wasn't finished. By noon, she'd filed complaints with the county about the Hendersons' illegal structure and contacted 3 contractors for quotes on surveying the property line. She even called the local news station's consumer protection hotline, claiming the Hendersons were part of a pattern of HOA defiance threatening property values. Her phone rang constantly with calls from other residents who'd received their own violation notices. The Johnsons got cited for their garden gnome, non-approved decorative elements. The Patels were fined for parking their 3rd car in their own driveway, exceeding the 2-vehicle limit per household. Mrs. Chen faced daily penalties for her rose bushes allegedly encroaching on the sidewalk by 3 inches. Karen's gone completely insane. Tom's neighbor Dave complained during an emergency community meeting that evening in the subdivision's clubhouse. She cited me for having the wrong brand of doormat. She measured my dog, added Sarah from Maple Street. Said golden retrievers over 65 pounds violate the pet size restrictions. Karen arrived 30 minutes late, carrying a banker's box full of documentation and wearing a blazer that screamed, "I speak to managers professionally." She surveyed the room of angry faces with satisfaction. "I see everyone received their compliance notices," she announced, setting her box on the head table. "Good. We can address each violation systematically." "You can't fine people for the color of their mailbox," Dave protested. Section 3.1. 4 clearly states all mailboxes must conform to approved color standards. Karen replied without missing a beat. "Would you like me to read the relevant subsection aloud?" "Karen." Tom stood up slowly. "This has gone far enough. Nobody elected you dictator." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but Karen smiled coldly. "Actually, you elected me president with full authority to enforce the covenants. If you don't like how I'm doing my job, you can call for a vote of no confidence. But until then, these violations will be addressed." She pulled out a thick folder and began reading. Thomas and Martha Henderson, 247 Oakwood Drive. Violation 1. Structure exceeding easement boundaries by 3 inches. Violation 2. Mailbox painted in non-compliant color. Violation 3. As Karen's voice droned on, Tom noticed something that made his blood run cold. She wasn't just reading violations. She was reading from detailed surveillance notes. Times, dates, photos. She'd been watching his house, documenting their daily routines, cataloging every minor deviation from her interpretation of the rules. "How long have you been spying on us?" Martha interrupted. Karen looked up with genuine confusion. "I prefer the term community monitoring. And it's been 6 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days since I took office." The room fell silent. Even Karen's few supporters looked uncomfortable. "You've been stalking the entire neighborhood," Tom said quietly. "I've been doing my job," Karen snapped back. "Unlike the previous board, I take our community standards seriously." That's when Tom made his decision. "Martha, call a lawyer. Everyone else, I'm calling an emergency vote. Karen Whitmore needs to be removed from office." Karen's confident smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. "You'll need a 2/3 majority. Good luck with that." As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Karen gathered her papers with methodical precision. She'd anticipated this rebellion, and she had contingency plans. The Hendersons might think they'd won, but she was just getting started. Outside in the parking lot, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized weeks ago. County Building Inspector. This is Karen Whitmore again. I'd like to file a formal complaint about multiple code violations in Meadowbrook Heights. Yes, I have documentation. Karen Whitmore stood ankle-deep in her neighbor's prize-winning begonias at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, wielding a measuring tape like a sword and screaming about property lines loud enough to wake the entire Meadowbrook Heights subdivision. This gazebo is thievery ances over the easement. She shrieked at Tom Henderson, who stood on his back porch in his bathrobe, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. As HOA president, I'm legally obligated to enforce these violations. Tom blinked slowly, processing the sight of the 50-something woman in her pressed khakis and HOA uniform shirt trampling his wife's garden. Karen, it's not even 7 in the morning, and those are my wife's flowers you're standing on. The HOA bylaws don't recognize business hours for violations of this magnitude, Karen declared, pulling out her phone to snap photos. This structure clearly violates Section 4.27 regarding outdoor installations within 10 feet of property boundaries. That gazebo has been there for 8 years, Tom said, his voice dangerously calm. We got approval from the previous HOA board. Karen's eyes lit up with the fervor of someone who'd found their life's purpose in other people's minor infractions. Previous board decisions can be overturned if they contradict current interpretations of the covenant. I've done my research, Tom. She had indeed done her research. Ever since being elected HOA president 6 months ago, on a platform of restoring Meadowbrook standards, Karen had transformed from merely annoying neighbor to full-scale domestic terrorist. Her filing cabinet now contained 247 potential violations, cross-referenced by address and severity level. Her daily patrol route covered every street in the 89-home community, and her camera roll held enough evidence to prosecute half the neighborhood for crimes against suburban perfection. Look, Karen, Tom started, stepping off his porch. Maybe we can discuss this at the next board meeting. No discussion necessary. The gazebo moves, or I'm filing a formal complaint with the county. Karen stepped deeper into the flower bed, crushing a particularly expensive dahlia. And while we're at it, your mailbox is painted the wrong shade of black. Forest black, not midnight black. I have the color codes right here. Tom's jaw twitched. Get out of my garden. This is HOA business, Tom. I have the right to inspect any property for compliance issues. You have the right to knock on my door and ask permission. You don't have the right to trample my wife's flowers. Karen straightened to her full height of 5'4", chin raised defiantly. The covenant supersedes your personal property rights within the bounds of community standards. That's when Martha Henderson appeared beside her husband, still in her pajamas, but holding a garden hose. Without a word, she turned the nozzle to full pressure and aimed it directly at Karen. The shock of cold water hit Karen square in the chest, soaking her clipboard and sending her measuring tape flying into the neighbor's yard. She stumbled backward, sputtering and furious. You can't do this. Karen gasped, water dripping from her perfectly styled hair. This is assault. This is me watering my flowers, Martha said sweetly. You just happen to be standing in them. As Karen stormed off toward her pristine white SUV, Tom called after her, Stay off my property, Karen. I'm serious. But Karen was already planning her next move. The Hendersons had just declared war, and she intended to win it. The surveyor's stakes appeared overnight like a crop of surveying fungi, dotting the Hendersons' property line with mathematical precision. Karen had hired the most thorough and expensive property surveying company in the county, and their findings were devastating to her case. Ma'am, the lead surveyor explained to Karen as she stood rigidly in her driveway at 6 a.m., clutching her coffee like a weapon. The gazebo isn't over the line. It's actually 14 inches inside their property boundary. Your initial measurements were incorrect. Karen's face went through several color changes, settling on a shade that matched her fuchsia athletic wear. That's impossible. I measured it myself. Measuring tapes can be unreliable for precision work, the surveyor said diplomatically. Our GPS equipment shows the structure is completely compliant. But instead of accepting defeat, Karen doubled down. Then I want the entire neighborhood surveyed. Every structure, every fence, every decorative element. If the Hendersons are compliant, I guarantee others aren't. The surveyor glanced at his invoice pad. That would cost approximately $15,000 for the whole subdivision. Bill it to the HOA emergency fund. What Karen didn't realize was that Tom Henderson had spent 30 years as a construction project manager before retiring. While she'd been plotting her next legal maneuver, he'd been building something far more permanent. The fence went up on a Saturday morning with military precision. Tom had rallied 8 neighbors who'd received Karen's violation notices, and together they erected a 6-foot privacy fence along every inch of his property line that bordered community space. The fence was perfectly legal, completely within his property boundaries, and absolutely impenetrable. Karen discovered the fence during her regular morning patrol and stood staring at it in disbelief. The wooden barrier blocked her view of the Hendersons' backyard entirely, making her community monitoring impossible. More importantly, it blocked access to the community walking path that had previously cut through a corner of their property, an easement that, upon closer legal examination, had never been properly documented. "Tom!" she shouted, pounding on the fence. "Tom Henderson." Tom appeared at his back gate, calmly sipping coffee. "Morning, Karen. You can't block community access to the walking path." "There is no community access," Tom replied mildly. "I had the title company research the easement you mentioned. Turns out it was just a handshake agreement from 1987 that was never legally recorded. This is private property." Karen's face cycled through several expressions before settling on fury. "I'll sue you for blocking community amenities." "With whose money? The HOA budget you've blown on surveys and legal threats?" Tom smiled. "Oh, and Karen? The emergency meeting you tried to avoid last week? We held it anyway. 97% vote of no confidence. You're no longer HOA president." The words hit Karen like physical blows. She stumbled backward, processing the implications. "You can't remove me without proper procedure. We followed every procedure in the bylaws, the ones you insisted everyone memorize." Tom's voice remained perfectly calm. "Your replacement starts Monday." Karen stood alone beside the fence as the reality sank in. Her reign of suburban terror was over. Her credibility was destroyed. Her neighbors actively despised her, and now she was trapped in her own home, unable to patrol or monitor or control anything beyond her own property line. But as she walked back to her house, passing the surveyor stakes that had cost the community thousands of dollars, something hardened in her expression. The Hendersons might have won this battle, but the war was far from over. Later that evening, as Tom and Martha celebrated with their neighbors at an impromptu fence-warming party, none of them noticed the white SUV parked across the street. Karen sat behind the wheel, making phone calls and taking notes, her laptop open to real estate websites. If she couldn't control Meadowbrook Heights from within, perhaps it was time to consider other options. The house 3 doors down from the Hendersons had just gone on the market, and Karen had always believed in strategic positioning. After all, the best defense was a good neighbor.